Come on in. Welcome to my studio. My name is Jad. I'm not quite even sure what to call myself these days, but musician, composer, radio storyteller, podcaster. I created Radiolab and Dolly Parton's America and a bunch of other radio shows and podcasts, and mostly I do it here. This has been my sanctuary and my workspace for about 14 years. The single GPS coordinates, this is right here, where I spent the most of my life is in this seat, staring at those two screens. In 2011, very fortunate, truly one of the greatest days of my life, I got awarded the MacArthur grant. It gave me more money than I'd ever had all at once. And basically I used it to make this little room within a room. So this is all somewhat soundproof. My whole acoustic world is basically the idea that you take familiar sounds and you treat them to make them strange, right? So when I'm doing a project, the first thing I think is this. Did Dolly Parton's America, right? Which was an exploration of where I grew up, Nashville, Tennessee. Starting in 1973 with Jolene, Dolly would churn out 4 consecutive #1s in roughly a year. I created a lot of that score using this. This is a dulcimer, is that what this is? I don't know, I ordered it. And it's horribly out of tune right now, but I ended up sort of sampling it using this mic, creating a lot of instruments that then became these very big lush pads that then I used to score a lot of the thing. And I'll often do that. I'll often take bits of the interviews themselves, little tiny fragments of a voice, and then, using granular synthesis or wavetable synthesis or something like that, make whole worlds out of this so that you're listening to the voice tell you a story, but you're also hearing the world that the voice sits within, which is also of the same voice in a way. I used just a simple recorder in a score. That sound, it's the sound of childhood in a way, because we all had to learn how to play the recorder. And so I end up sampling that. I have no idea what I'm playing. A little kalimba here. For the Dolly score, I ended up getting a ton of cassettes of hers off of eBay. Jolene, it's probably from 1974. So this would have been the year that she wrote Jolene, this cassette. And I would play it through these old cassette recorders where you could vary the speed and kind of create sort of effects with the cassettes.
That's a beautiful name. I said, I bet your dad's named Joe and you're named after your dad, right? She said, no, it's just Jolene. I said, well, I love that name.
I love trying to find sound sources that are almost inside the story. Just feels better to me when I'm doing that kind of work. This, it's a Tibetan bowl I got in India when we went to, I was sampling in it just a couple days ago, just to create, very sort of pure sine waves that you then can, build whole sound worlds out of. This synthesizer, the Juno 60, was the first synth I ever bought with my own money. I've had this thing for 20, 30 years maybe. I still use it. I went really deep into analog synths for a long time, and then it started taking up too much space. So I sold them all except for the Sub 37, Moog, and then the Roland Juno 60. This is the greatest synth ever because nobody makes a chorus like this chorus. Let's see if we can get a different sound. I mean, these days a software synth can do kind of the same thing, but these things are so temperamental. They fall out of tune, going from one This one you can't even hear pitch. But I love this thing. I use it on a lot of the scores that I write. And this thing is just like great in terms of like a basic synthesizer that can give you like really meaty basses, like really like just sub basses. You're like, oh. And it's got like incredible distortion circuits on it. So you can drive it at the filter stage, you can drive it at the oscillator stage and just get really dirty synth sounds. But truth is, like, I don't use these a lot because simply getting the sound in and out of them takes usually 4 times longer than I have, you know? But it's the kind of thing where, like, when you're trying to make something, sometimes just having a thing you can touch activates a different part of the creative process. And you can kind of like, just twist knobs and you feel kind of like a kid again. Makes me remember why I make music, in a way. Similarly, like I have those pedals over there, and that's sort of the same reason. So what I can do is I can send and it comes in through here. First stage in the cycle is this looper. So I can grab little bits and then cycle it. And then it gets, actually I think it's here and then here. So it goes through these preamps. And these preamps are not matched. So like the left and the right gets sort of out of phase. Would I kind of like that? I like the sort of, and then it sort of gets through these 2 old Moogs, and these things are so finicky that they're just completely different. They're the same unit, but just they output completely different sounds. So then like I'll capture it, loop it, pitch shift it, and then run it through 2 different time delays, reverbs. And you just get these big, gooey spaces. And then there's this thing, which honestly, it's just a pain in my butt, but this has like a gazillion effects on it. I'm constantly buying pedals and then swapping them in and out. This is like a feedback pedal that I will install at some point so that it can take any of the outputs and then just create screeching feedback from it. I had a lot of multi-effect pedals that I really liked, but then you end up having to kind of like for too long, and then it just kills the buzz. So I have gone back to really old pedals that you can just grab stuff. Like this one, I love these pedals because these are pitch shifting. And so you can, here, maybe I'll pull up a session so you can hear. So now I grabbed a little bit of the sine wave, put it here. It's already distorting because it's running through these things. And so, like I love these things because you just kind of get basic output. Oh, the low pass filter's on, that's why. But then you can add in octaves. And then, throw it through some reverb. And then throw in the ring mod to maybe get like a cool tone. Okay, this is an interview I did with this guy named Bode Omajola.
Fela starts his music.
Okay, so we can like throw him. Suddenly he's coming in through all these pedals. So this is like, suddenly you take a voice, create like a big sound out of it, and then you could like, run it through some ring mods and this is a delay and reverb right here, this avalanche. And then, you could pitch it, do like weird things. Create something very pretty, right? So like, I love the idea that you can take that guy's voice and you just turn it into something pretty immediately, and like no one would know, right? But I know, and it just like, so I'm like, oh yeah, this is all Bode world. It's all Bode here, Bode here. And so I'll do a lot of scoring that way, where the story and the sound are actually literally holding hands. And sometimes I think the listener can feel it, sometimes, you know? And I played around with different pedals, but I like the space because what it does is it pulls me away from here, and I have to turn this way. And then it's just kind of like much more like you're like a kid again, you know, you're just like having fun and turning knobs, and then you're also just listening. And so it's engaging your ears a lot more than your eyeballs. I'll jump on this once or twice a week just to sort of get my brain thinking in a new way. Every part of the process, from the interview to this part where you're playing with the sounds and the music, to me is reassociating or something. Like I am of the cast in mind where I can live in my head really easily and I can dissociate from the world. And for me, interviewing another person is a way to like pull you into the now, pull you into like, here we are in this moment together. And similarly, the sounds are my attempt to do that for the audience in a way, to really pull them into the experience of being with this voice, these voices. I'll show you some sessions. I recently created a series called Fela Kuti, Fear No Man, which took 3 years to make. It was a series of stories about the musician Fela Kuti. And one of the episodes that I think is the most sonically interesting, it's called Enter the Shrine. And it's trying to give you the experience of what it would have been like to be in Fela's club, the Shrine.
Hypnotized, like you're all inside the music.
A kind of hypnotic dancing.
Reacts to music, dancing and listening.
Things are just getting going here.
I remember being lost in music.
So the whole idea of this particular session,
What? This idea of the spiral.
everything is always repeating and looping.
Circle.
Because the music repeats and loops. And so the idea was to treat the interviews as if they're musical elements. So they're constantly like, you can hear.
To deal with time.
I thought, this is really an amazing and beautiful
Brian Eno.
It was almost like a field of sound.
And meanwhile,
Get bigger.
the rhythm section's keeping going.
So just creating these little bits. Taking little bits of the song and running it through these like LFOs and various things to create this kind of like pulsing effect. You're just like, your mind's unraveling a little bit. A lot of what I end up doing is first in live, and then I'll fly it into Pro Tools. For me, I see yellow, and yellow is always like narration. This is Jad right here, this little yellow. And then archival is always deep maroon. This is all archival right here. These are like word clouds. And then the music that I write for the episodes is always red. Let's see. This is some, I don't even know what. Just lots of little pieces, like little ambient things. I don't know what that is. You just like kind of like just generating little things and then sticking them in until like, you know, iteratively you feel like you've got the right effect that you want. Sometimes it's fleeting, but you can work for like days just to get that like right impact for that one moment. Let's open this. Let's see what we find when we open this up. I haven't opened this since 2018. I think it was at one time, this was the episode of Radiolab that was the most downloaded. Was the colors episode. Let's see what's going on here.
Scan the visual field, add in the colors.
This is a choir. You know, the whole idea of this particular piece was that suppose you had a bunch of creatures gathered together looking at the same rainbow. Who sees the best rainbow was the question. And it turns out that the champion rainbow seer was the mighty mantis shrimp, which is it's worth looking at the shrimp for a second because they're just incredible creatures. Like, look at this thing. Like, my God, It's beautiful. They're about this big. Underneath their bodies, they have these like cocked legs like this, and they're spring-loaded basically, and they will just like shoot out their little punchers, and they can unleash a blow that's got the force of like a shotgun basically. And also like underwater, they'll punch so hard that it creates a little empty space in the ocean, and then the ocean water will collapse that space, and in the collapse it creates a tiny bit of heat that creates a bubble of plasma in the water that then goes fling, and shoots out like a bullet. So they'll be like boom, 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 boom. Oh, they're really violent, but beautiful. But anyhow, they have these eyes, these incredible eyeballs. So like we humans have 3 rods and cones in our eyes. These creatures have 16. So they presumably can see thousands, millions of colors, we don't know, but way past our sight. And so we were trying to sort of render that for the audience. But the problem is we work in radio where you can't see anything. And also, even if you could see, even if you did have a picture, you cannot see what the mantis shrimp sees. So what we ended up doing was using an extended audio metaphor of a choir. So we sent a message to a choir listserv, and I was like, we have 2 days to do this. There's no way that we're gonna get this done, and we don't have any money to pay. But we sent it to a listserv. Within a day, I was in a church, and there were like 150 people singing the colors of the rainbow, like, because choir people are the most amazing people on earth. 3, 2, 1. So this is the choir. Purple, red, orange, very, very red. And I was just figuring it out on the spot. 3, 2, 1. I really hope this works. Let's just hold a bunch of notes. Are we recording? We got that whole thing? All right, awesome.
Get that mantis, shrimp. Mantis, like praying mantis. Mantis shrimp.
The idea was to sort of like, as you go from like a dog singing the rainbow, dogs have 2 rods and cones, you'd hear a very narrow band of frequencies.
Blue, he'll be able to see blue just fine.
So it would see a rainbow starting with blue.
Same blue we see.
And then grading off into green.
Same green as us.
And then disappearing. The rainbow would end there.
And then as you go to like sparrow, butterfly, and then ultimately the mantis shrimp, you could hear the sound world just expand to contain all of this like density of notes and frequencies.
They would start the rainbow way, way, way inside where we see violet. They would see an extraordinarily deep ultraviolet. And then they would go on through several kinds of ultraviolet, probably 5 or 6 kinds of ultraviolet. And then they would get to violet, which is now they're reaching our colors, and go through violet and violet blue and blue green.
Where they have those green, blue blues as well?
Yep. And then they would go out into the reds. So they would be about as red as us when they got to the red end.
But only in the reds?
Yeah.
And it was a really good way to not just explain mantis vision, but to feel it, to like experience it. And that's the thing. It's like whenever you're explaining something, if you're actually just explaining it, you've already lost. You have to create an experience that someone can have with you. I think it was really great. It worked out really well. The business we're in is not to make art, it's to communicate, you know? But there does feel like that story sometimes wants that. It's saying something beautiful, and there's an internal world locked within the voices that you just kind of want to surface. You want to bring it out. And sometimes I just won't stop until it feels like it feels to me. Like it conjures in my imagination something. I'm like, oh, You got to go there. So sort of the business logic for me is if I do it really well, the tail will just be really long and it'll just always be there and people will discover it whenever they discover it. And hopefully they'll fall in love with it. And that'll somehow justify itself, you know? There are days though when I'm like working to try and make like a really specific sound work where I'm like, this is so stupid. But then if you get it right and then, you know, 4 years later after you've forgotten it, someone like encounters that thing and has an emotional reaction, you're like, okay, that's why.